Everyone. Welcome again to this video. I think the first thing to say is that there won't be any videos coming up for the next two classes, sort of next week. The reason is that we're going to be doing a practice rhetorical analysis for the next class, and that's going to be coming to you by email. And then we're actually going to do the assignment. And again, that's going to come to you by email. So I'm telling you now, look out for your emails. The practice will be, as I think I've explained, it will just be an essay. You'll have a chance to work at it, write up an analysis, and then you can compare and contrast it with the one that I've done myself. And then a day or so later, I will send you the actual assignment essay by email, and you will have 2 or 3 days in which to get your essay back to me, your assignment back to me, as a Word or as a Pages document. Subsequently, we go into the library modules, and I'll tell you more about that by email too, but that will be done in our eLearn Moodle environment. I've had 1 or 2 emails from students asking me, is there any homework? Should we be doing anything? Answer, yes, very simply. Read this. That's what you need to be doing, okay? Because you can't pass this course unless you do. And I'm assuming that by now you already have it from the bookstore and that you are commencing with your reading. There is a little handout that I've done on Cambodia. I actually can't remember whether I've given this to you or mentioned it before in a video, but anyway, here it is, and this will be as an attachment for you. Just some initial thoughts about the book. You can see in the second paragraph here, I'm mentioning student presentations. Actually, don't worry about that because I've decided to do things a bit differently this year. So we're going to be looking at 2 or 3 short stories later in this course. And I will be asking you to put together a short 5-minute presentation, digital presentation on comparing and contrasting one of the stories that you like with another story or a film or something like that. So I'll give you the instructions down the track. It will be very easy, I think, that assignment. But my point is that you won't be doing a presentation on Cambodia. But you will be doing an essay. So that's why you need to be reading and familiar with the text. And you can see what I'm saying here. The book is essentially a critique of modern capitalist society, the way it's run, at least according to Fawcett, by political and media elites, the way that everything is subsumed by corporate language, logic, and everything is seemingly pulled by consumerism. So the interesting thing about the book is the way that Fawcett sees an analogy with what happened in Cambodia in the 1970s when it was taken over by this Marxist group called the Khmer Rouge. And it's a risky strategy for him to take. It's an analogy that some students find to be almost absurd. It's an analogy that other students find to be very, very persuasive. But the book is in large part about metaphor and also about how we need to be aware of how metaphor is used to manipulate us. The book is about how technology affects cognitive organization and behavior. And that's a central issue to us today. Arguably, even though the book was written back in 1986, it's dealing with themes that are more important today than they were back then, or at least more relevant today than back then. Anyway, we're going to talk about all of that. We'll get to that in due course. This is just to sort of give you a general idea of what's happening in the book. What we have now in this document is some brief notes on the allusions and references that are made in the book to various people. philosophers and thinkers. So I've tried to give you a bit of help on that. Marshall McLuhan is going to be very important for our study of this book. You can see this paragraph here. And further down, a note about W.B. Yeats, the Irish poet, and Kierkegaard here at the end. This is wonderful. Kierkegaard posited that doubt was an essential element of faith. In other words, to believe that God exists without having doubted that God exists would not be a belief worth having. Interesting. And this poem, I think, is fabulous by Yeats. That's why I put it here. It's the last stanza of a poem called Ben Bulben, which is actually a mountain close to where he lived. And in the poem, he's sort of imagining his death, but not in a mawkish, hand-wringing way, but in this really dramatic and stunning, almost existentialist understanding of mortality. Look at this. Under bare Ben Bulben's head in Drumcliff churchyard, Yeats is laid. A church stands near. A rector was ancestor there many years ago. By the road, an ancient cross. No marble, no conventional phrase. On limestone, quarried near the spot, by his command these words are cut. Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by. Good, yeah? We're going to encounter another little poem by Yeats in about 10 minutes or so from now. That poem is perhaps a helpful segue into the next thing I want to look at, which is another poem. This one, written by Andrew Marvell. Marvell died in 1678. And this is an extraordinary thing. We're going to do a rhetorical analysis of this poem. So let's just see what we've got in front of us here. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. Coyness means shyness, reticence, and this poem is entitled To His Coy Mistress. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow. 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart, for lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honour turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Now, therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in his slow chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. The message, I think it's pretty clear, isn't it? This is a 17th century chat-up line. This is, let's get it on, darling, quickly, now, before we all turn into worm meat. If we turn to rhetorical strategies, what is the primary strategy at work here? Pathos, of course it is. It's pathos. He is appealing to her emotions, trying to amuse her, to flatter her, to chasten her, to encourage her. It's pathos, isn't it? And insofar as there is logos here, I think it reduces down to that simple idea of carpe diem, seize the bloody day, right? Because we're going to be worm meat tomorrow. Ethos, maybe we'll mention that perhaps towards the end. But there's the message, and those are the strategies at work. And now what I want to look at in detail is at the devices that are pushing the message here. And this class is mostly about the rhetorical devices, which I've been promising you that I would do. So the first thing to do here is to divide up the poem into its separate stanzas. So we need to draw a line 20 to 21. That's the end of the first stanza. And then down at 32 to 33, I think, there's another line there. And I kind of squashed everything up to keep it on one page. So it's in 3 stanzas. So if we just focus on this first stanza, what rhetorical devices do we notice? You just have a read of that first stanza, think what you come up with. Okay, so we've got metaphors, obviously. Where is the obvious metaphor in this first stanza? Well, we have a reference to vegetable love. Love is a vegetable. Love, tenor, is a vegetable vehicle. So what do we then do to analyze the metaphor? We explore the properties of the vehicle. Okay, so talk to me about vegetables. What are vegetables like? What might we say about vegetables? Well, they grow, but they're only going to grow if they are nurtured and cared for, loved. What else about vegetables? They're nutritious. They're good for us. They're good to taste. So there's a kind of visceral quality to vegetableness. What else? Well, we eat vegetables. And if I tell you that there is an erotic meaning to that, well, why would you be surprised? And guess what? Vegetables rot. They die, they decay. There's a kind of cycle to it all, right? You get the picture, and that is the picture. That's the point. He's using a metaphor here in this way to engage us with the text, to get us to draw these images, to connect in this way. And what's the other point about metaphors? As I've been drumming into you, they create mood and tone. Here, it's designed to be amusing. You may be offended, okay, fine, I get that, but it's designed to be amusing and light and fluffy, and it's that intention is driven by the use of metaphors and similes elsewhere. Okay, we've got that. What else do we see here? We see an allusion to, well, to the Bible. This reference to the flood, to Noah's flood, the conversion of the Jews, which I believe is, I understand, is at Armageddon. So we have allusions here, allusions to the map. So we have the Ganges, the river in India. The Humber is actually a river in the Midlands in England. And that kind of takes me to another rhetorical device here, which is hyperbole, which is exaggeration. And so we have this exaggerated sense of space from one side of the globe to the other. His love encompasses that, but also across time as well, from the flood to the conversion of the Jews. So it's that sense of hyperbole. I mean, he's going to spend 100 years, you know, praising her eyes, and 200 to adore each breast. You know, this is hyperbolic, and it's creating flattery here, which is driving the pathos, which is the main strategy at work here. What else do we see? Well, I think we have rhyme. I mean, that may have been the first thing you saw. Time, crime, way, day, side, tide. These are actually rhyming couplets, because two lines are coupled together. That's pretty obvious, right? So we notice that. We should always be asking why when we notice things at university. And at the moment, it may not seem clear. It may not seem that important. I mean, it does create a kind of jokey, light sort of sense. But actually, the rhyming couplets will become very important later on. Just bear with me on that. And the same thing applies to the rhythm here, which we call meter when we analyze poems or song lyrics. And we have a clear meter or rhythm here. Had we but whirled enough and time this coyness lady were no crime, yeah, but at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying. Yeah. And the way that we can analyze this is by talking about these feet. So when we have this kind of da 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 da, each foot is called an iamb. And here we have 4 in each line, which gives us iambic tetrameter. So tetra 4. Some of you will be interested in this. A lot of you won't, I get it. But some of you will be, and will be interested in perhaps studies down the track. And if you read Renaissance drama, Shakespeare, something like that, you will often come across iambic pentameter as the form. And that's otherwise called blank verse. If you kind of switch them around, so you have, instead of da-da-da-da, you have da-da, or da-da, you have a trochee. And if you just have 2 kind of emphasis, 2 stresses, that it's called a spondee. I don't think you really need that for English 100, but, you know, why not? Why not know it? And actually, it may help you if you decide to look at a song lyric in your research essay down the track. Okay, now, I think that's all I want to say about the first stanza. So let's just go now to the second. What's the first thing that we should really be noticing here as we shift from the first stanza to the second? What kind of shouts out at you? Well, I think we have a clear change of tone. And the key word here, or device, is contrast. I think I've mentioned this to you before. Contrast is your friend. If you're ever reading something in any class and you're kind of not clear how to get into the text or how to sort of work it, then just reach for contrast and suddenly it will start to come alive. And it's very much evident here. We have this dramatic shift. And that contrast, that shift in mood, is created by the different images that are being drawn here. You know, references to worms and dust and ashes. So, clear contrast. And there's something happening here with the rhyme and with the meter. Let's just see what's going on. So reading down the rhyme, we have breast, rest, part, heart, state, rate, here, near, lie, eternity. So eternity doesn't rhyme, as it should. It stands out. But eternity does rhyme with another word, which comes, 4 lines later? Virginity. And so that creates, that standout, creates a connection between two words, eternity and virginity. Let's now look at the meter. Everything's tripping on really nicely in terms of rhythm, but at my back I always hear times winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts. It's not dessert. They didn't have that notion of dessert or pudding in the Renaissance. It's a desert. And so that's a trochee instead of an iamb. And it stands out. So now we have 3 things standing out, which we can connect in a kind of constellation of an image. Desert, eternity, virginity. We have another metaphor. Virginity is a desert. And virginity, tenor, desert, vehicle, analyze the properties of a desert. What have you got? You've got something which is dry and barren and arid and yeah, so I mean, there it is, and it's bang in the center of the poem. That disturbing, shocking image, that metaphor, is in the middle. It's basically what the whole poem is about. And you see that it's kind of stands out to us because of the way that the rhyme and the meter suddenly change. This is what I want you to be alert for as you read other texts. You know, always be alert for things that stand out. The line in the song that you love, which is a bit longer than the rest, or shorter than the rest, or the rhyme that just, you know, which is unexpected, something like that. Okay. We have a personification here too, with time, as if riding a chariot. So that's another rhetorical device being used. Okay, down to this final stanza. And once again, if you're wondering how on earth do I begin to think anything or say anything, just go for contrast. Just go for contrast. And clearly we have another contrast now. From the dryness and aridity, barrenness of the desert, and ash and all that. Now we have, in contrast, movement and light and energy and heat and communion. You know, what's it like inside a grave? Think of all those adjectives. And now, if you like, the opposite of those adjectives is what's given to us in this final stanza, which is almost like a celebration of lust and of congress and communion in the images that he's drawing. Again, the personification of time. And we almost have a speeding up here in the imagery, this rolling up our sweetness into one ball, metaphoric. You know, we can imagine the couple and the copulating lovers tearing pleasures with rough stride through the iron gates of life. So we have this idea of energy, of just bursting forward. And then right at the end here, a couple of interesting devices. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, comma, yet we will make him run. Son stand still is an alliteration. When I'm in the classroom, I ask somebody to actually read these last two lines, and then I get them to read them quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And you can't do it. You can't say son. You can't do it. It's like an alliterative break, forcing you to kind of halt or pause, comma, yet we will make him run. Clever. I think it's clever. Just these little details. And this guy's a genius at using language. You know? And finally, we have the personification here of the sun. You always need to look a little closer. I mean, okay, so we have personification, but what as? It's as male here. Him. Two reasons perhaps for that. Firstly, I think it was conventional symbolism of the time. The sun was often associated with male or maleness, masculinity, whereas, for example, the moon was often associated with the female. So there's that, and that's possibly where we might find an attempt at ethos, this idea that I am your son, I, male, will give you this heat, energy, life, congress, and enjoyment of life. Through me, you get that. And that kind of takes me to step three, which is the critique. And with a poem like this, it's so subjective, isn't it? It's so much a question of interpretation. Some of you may find this really a bit icky and offensive, and you may not like it at all. Fine. You may find it very egotistical. I get that. Others among you may think, you know, this is just funny and light and it's clever, and you may really like it. So, but my point in doing it was to demonstrate to you, I hope, as you now see, the way that devices operate and drive strategies. Okay, I just want to take you to another little poem here. Here we are. This is a little poem written by Yeats. I told you we would come to Yeats again. It's so short that we call it doggerel, really. It's something, I remember reading it was written on the back of a cigarette packet in a Dublin pub. So here we are. Hands, do what you're bid. Bring the balloon of the mind that bellies and drags in the wind into its narrow shed. What do you think that's about? Well, we have a key device at work here in this poem, in the middle of the poem. It's a metaphor. I hope you saw that. And so what is it? It's this idea that the mind is a balloon. So mind, tenor, balloon, vehicle. And what you then do is explore the properties and characteristics of the vehicle, of balloons. So, you know, what are balloons? They are filled with what? They're filled with hot air. They will float away unless you pull them back and keep them down. I suppose that's what the hands are doing. But remember, this is not actually a balloon he's writing about. This is the mind, his mind. And so I suppose what we've got here is an injunction to himself, for himself, to concentrate, to put his mind where it needs to be. And I think that takes us to this reference to a shed, into its narrow shed. I mean, do you think he actually means a shed, a garden shed? Because if he doesn't, you got yourself a metaphor, another one. What might the narrow shed be? Remembering that he's talking about focus and concentration and getting his mind where it should be. Well, shed, head. And so we have a hidden rhyme there. The head is under the shed, if you like. But that's really what it is. And he was, it seems, going through writer's block, and he was actually using his craft, using language to try and resolve the problem that he was having. It's like if you're musicians and you write songs, you're just going to strum away at some chords just until you find something. You know, you just keep at it until you find something. Creative writers among you will know about that process. It's no good just pacing up and down the floor, just, you know, farting away your life. Sit and write. Get going, because then something will happen. Same with essay writing, actually. It's one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given from an instructor way back is precisely that. Don't pace up and down. Actually start writing or typing. You may delete what you began with, but at least you will have started. And it's the starting which is the most difficult thing. I get it. It is for me too. I have to push myself to do these videos. You know, just do it. Get going, and then it just builds, right? Okay. One more poem, and then I'll give you the list of rhetorical devices. Here we are. This is a poem written by Sylvia Plath, who was an American, and who did a lot of her writing in England. She married the famous English poet Ted Hughes. They had a tempestuous relationship. There were children. And well, more about Sylvia Plath in a moment. Let's just work through the poem. What the hell is this about? I'm going to pause this for a minute or so whilst you have a read and a think. Tricky, right? You know, in the classroom, I usually get one or two suggestions from students, but most students are sort of sitting there thinking, oh my God, I wish this wasn't happening. All right, what do you do when you're stuck? What do you reach for? Answer, contrast. It's always a good place to start. So why don't we do that? Just work this in terms of the contrast that we find. Beginning with the word stasis. Well, I told you what stasis means, right? So it's stillness, no movement. And we have darkness, okay? A substanceless blue. I'm not quite sure what that is. But we've got a hillside. And this reference to furrow connects with that, because a furrow is something in the earth made by a plow. So we have this sort of notion of a earthy sense. We've got a brown arc, not quite sure what that is. the dark hooks, blackness, blood, shadows. All of this is creating a mental landscape, isn't it? Of darkness and earthiness and stillness. And now look at the contrast. So suddenly we're moving. We have movement in the text through the air. We have whiteness now. We have a foam. We have a glitter of seas, so there's a reference to water, melting, dew. And what do you think the red eye in the morning is going to be? A reference to the sun. And so we have, just by looking at words like that and looking for the contrast, we have what we always have in text with contrast, which is this dynamic, this movement in the text, the traverse from A to B, and maybe to C to D. When we look at movie scripts, anything, novelistic or story with characters, they will make journeys, and it will be the contrasts which characterize the sort of points in that journey. And so it is with something like this. Okay, so it's a start, right? I mean, it's not like we've got a comprehensive analysis of a poem yet, but we've got a start. This idea of movement from dark to light, from stillness to action, from night to morning. So logically, actually, the next question we might ask ourselves is, excuse me, what is the vehicle that's taking the poet on this journey, on this traverse from A to B? What is the vehicle, the thing that's helping her do it? Is there something we can find that will suggest vehicle here? Some of you may already pick up images that would suggest some type of a vehicle. For the rest of us, what would we do here? Probably we would do some research. And we would discover that Ariel was the name given by Plath to her horse. And she actually recounts a story where she was riding, I think it was in Grantchester or somewhere, but she was riding and suddenly something happened to the stirrups, and the horse kind of bolted and went crazy, and she was literally clinging on for dear life. Eventually, the horse calmed down, got back to the stables, and she subsequently described the experience as terrifying and wonderful. Those of you into extreme sports will get that adrenaline kind of thing. But the word Ariel, therefore, takes us to horse. And now that we know that from some research and reading, suddenly we're starting to see that imagery. So we have the landscape now, the hills and the furrows. The god's lioness is suggesting that mane, that kind of mythical Pegasus horse with the mane. The growing, how one we grow, pivot of heels and knees. You can imagine the rider on the side of the horse now with the knees pivoting on the side of the horse, galloping over the furrows in the earth. The brown arc of the neck I cannot catch as she's desperately trying to hold on to the neck of the horse. The eyes. You got to stand close to a horse if you haven't. There's just pulsing energy of the beast. It's a fantastic thing, and the eyes are huge and they're intelligent and they're checking you out. The dark hooks, presumably and the blood mouthfuls. The horse is presumably chomping at the bit and it's sort of cutting into its gums now, and it's suggesting sort of blood. The shadows, presumably because the sun is starting to rise, and so we're getting that image now of movement and time passing. Hauling through the air, yeah? It all starts to make more sense. The thighs, the hair in the wind, the flakes from the heels and the side of the horse desperately trying to grab hold of the horse. Godiva. What do you think? What does Godiva refer to? Well, I can tell you it isn't chocolates. So what do you do when you're a student and you come across something like that you don't understand? You research it, you Google it, right? And that's what you do. And you would discover that Lady Godiva takes us to the Middle Ages in England, a place called Coventry, a city in the Midlands. And the story goes that Lady Godiva said to her husband, the Lord, listen, hubby, if you don't raise taxes this year, I promise to ride naked on the back of a horse around Marketplace on May Day. And he said, okay, you're on. So he didn't raise taxes, and she rode around the marketplace. And today, in Coventry, you know, the winner of the local beauty pageant parades around the marketplace on the back of a horse. I mean, she has a little bikini now, of course, because it's the 21st century. But anyway, we have, ladies and gentlemen, a naked woman riding a horse. Okay, that's the allusion that gives us that image. Dead hands, dead stringencies. Stringencies are demands. I guess we can have this idea of she's becoming exhausted. Hands are just really tired. But now there's a problem when we get to this last 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas. What happens to the horse? It seems to kind of disappear, right? So analyzing this, we have to sort of ask ourselves why and come up with some sort of an explanation. It might be this idea of melting suggests that she's becoming at one with the elemental bestial presence of this animal, of this horse. I mean, it could be that notion, or it could be that she's literally flying now. She's projected forward from the horse, so it's a vehicle in that sense, sending her upwards and forwards in another kind of poetic sense. I know some of you are just screaming and falling asleep and you hate this stuff. I get it, but some of you are going to like it, and you know, some of this analysis is going to help with song lyrics, right? You know, and there's another reason why I'm doing this, guys, so just bear with me. We have at least another layer of meaning, which is to do with horse riding. Now, there's another layer, which connects with the notion of riding, but now riding in a different sense, which is taking us to the erotic meaning or layer of meaning in this poem. And before you accuse me of being a pervert, let's just see what the imagery is doing for us here. This idea of how one we grow, pivot of heels and knees. It's almost an image of the love-making couple. The furrow, what might be something which splits, what might an arrow be in the morning. We've got a brown arc of necks, dark hooks, sweet blood mouthfuls. Look, guys, we've got a naked woman riding a horse. Give me a break, all right? I mean, there is, I think, a deliberate intention to create erotic imagery here. The unpeeling suggests undressing. And the foam, the glitter of seas, here is the orgasm. But what results? Look, literally what results next? It's the consequence of that sexual congress, that celebration of eroticism. It's a child. That's where that layer of meaning takes us. More research reveals that she wrote this poem shortly after giving birth to her second child, Nicholas. And she was experiencing postnatal depression. So that research takes us into another layer of meaning here. Perhaps darker, altogether darker, and it's very much suggested at the end of this poem, where we have this key word of suicide. Everything connects. in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance, they actually connected orgasm with death. It was actually called a little death. I mean, it makes perfect sense if you think about it, because orgasm is that second or two, or maybe longer if you happen to be lucky, when you're not here anymore. I mean, you're literally transported. It's an out-of-body experience, and it doesn't really matter who's with you or whether there's anybody with you. You are transported. If ever you're reading Shakespeare or Webster or whatever, and you see references to death, you should be thinking about double meanings, possibly towards the erotic here. Because that was the symbolic convention of the time. And so she's making that connection here of, I think, sex with death. But it's not just death, it's this idea of suicide, of cauldron. A bit more research reveals that Sylvia Plath had a fascination with suicide. In 1953, she took an overdose and basically hid in the cellar of her parents' house. And she wasn't found for ages. I mean, it was a very close run thing by all accounts. Subsequently, there was a car crash she was driving. She described it as a suicide attempt. And 5 months after writing this poem, she did commit suicide. The circumstances, though, as with the previous circumstances, were never clear-cut. It was never clear that she was intending it to be the final act. It was almost as though she was testing the ground, exploring that experience. And so it was, right at the end. What happened was her children, I think this was in London, in an apartment, her children were kind of in the apartment. She closed herself in the kitchen, put towels around the door frame, and turned on the gas oven, and then put her head in the oven. So you would think that's a deliberate act, except that normally the maid would have arrived in time, probably to have saved her. But on this occasion, there was some problem with the buses or whatever. Anyway, she was late, and too late to save Sylvia Plath from actually dying. So, I mean, even now, people just don't know whether this was intended to be the final act. But what we have through this research is an understanding now of someone who is fascinated by that notion of death. And what she's doing here, arguably, is compelling us to think afresh or anew about something that maybe we just jump to conclusions about. I mean, if we hear about suicide, a suicide, we naturally jump to the conclusion that it's a tragic incident, and of course, it very likely is. But I think what Plath is suggesting here is the next time you hear about someone jumping off the Lionsgate Bridge, conjure with the idea that they may be smiling as they're jumping. That there is another way of perhaps thinking about this. And that's what literature should do. That's what good literature should do. That's why I teach literature. It should take us to these places, sometimes very uncomfortable, but it should be challenging us, getting us to rethink things that we just kind of take for granted and just assume. And I think, that's what she's doing here in multiple ways. I was teaching this way back at UBC, and that was actually in a sort of dedicated poetry setup. And I had an essay from a student analyzing this poem in terms of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, late 50s, 60s. And for them, the whole poem turned on that, the key N word. The superimposing of whiteness on blackness was how they saw this poem as communicating a message. And then they connected it with the fact that Plath was American and was, concerned about the civil rights movement and active in that sense. This was a terrific poem, and I hadn't actually thought to interpret it in that way. I had another interpretation from a student, perhaps less successful, but they interpreted this in terms of the splitting of the atom and the nuclear bomb and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1963. So it was a bit kind of left field, but fascinating, and certainly the image at the end, the red eye, the cauldron of morning, suggested this kind of mushroom cloud of the nuclear explosion. And the timing is about right, I suppose. 62, 63 Cuban Missile Crisis. Certainly back then there was a genuine fear of nuclear conflagration. And what's my point? I think my point is that the poem means what it means to you. And that's exactly how I want you to be thinking about this assignment essay I'm going to send you by email in a few days' time, next week. Students kind of stress out about this rhetorical analysis, and they come to me and they say, well, Ian, what if I get it wrong? What if I don't see the message? And you will. Trust me, you will. It will be the message that you see. And it will be the strategies and devices and fallacies that you see. I know I'm saying this ad nauseum, but I find I have to, just to kind of relax some students. I'm unlikely to give you a hard time because of what you're saying, as long as you're covering the bases. Who am I to argue with your interpretation? Provided you're seeing stuff that's there. And you need to concentrate, of course, on the way that you're writing. Okay, now, I keep promising you this list of rhetorical devices, so why don't I actually give it to you? Here it is. And I think I've taken you through all of these pretty much so far. And I think they're all the ones that you are going to need to do the first assignment successfully. It's all here. Most of it's already inside you. And unlike students who have to do this in class, you're actually going to be able to do this at home and look at this list anyway. There are 2 or 3 other rhetorical devices that I can think of that may interest you. So paralipsis is interesting. Paralipsis is it's a kind of form of irony, and it's when you give emphasis to something by pretending not to. Yeah. So it could be something like, it goes without saying. Da 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 da. So then why say that? And it's a kind of understatement, and it can be helpful in toning down antagonism and aggression when you're talking to people. I need not mention your problem is a friendlier way of saying, I know you got a problem, right? So paralipsis, I think, is a kind of subtle form of rhetoric that can be useful to us in discourse. Another one is litotes, and this is understatement using a double negative. So you might say something like, I'm not unaware of your difficulty, and again, it's just backing off from being direct, and so it gives us a more subtle, gentler form of discourse. Litotes is from the Greek. meaning or suggesting lightness. Yeah. And it can be useful in communicating ethos, this idea of downplaying your own accomplishments. You know, I need not say that I'm not as good as Gretzky. A hockey player might say that, and we appreciate that modesty. We find it engaging, but also we accept the notion of an approximation to accomplishment, to perfection. So that's litotes. Anadiplosis is another one, which is often used in advertising. It's a form of repetition, and it kind of builds to a climax. You know, it could work something like, it began as a couple, the couple became a family, the family became a tribe, the tribe became a nation. You see how it builds. There's a famous Coca-Cola advert I'm thinking of that was done for the Super Bowl, I think 2016. And that uses anadiplosis, you know, so it's sort of Coca-Cola with ice, ice with friends, friends with stories, stories about love. It's just bum, 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 like that. So once you know about anadiplosis, you'll see that it's used a lot in the way that advertisements are kind of pitched and put together. I think the thing to say about rhetorical devices here, to sort of conclude this segment of the video, is that when they're used poetically or in a literary way, in a literary text, it's often with the purpose of compelling us, encouraging us at least, to see familiar things afresh or anew in just the way that I suggested Plath is doing. But all the texts we've looked at so far are getting us to do that. And I think that more generally, which is to say in a more prosaic sense or in prose texts, for example, the assignment text is going to be a prose text, it's actually going to be an essay. In that case, rhetorical devices are used to drive one or more of the three strategies. So I hope that you're now familiar with that. You know, they're used for emphasis and they're used to drive the message in some shape or form. That's what rhetorical devices are all about. Okay, now, just for the end of this video, what I want to do is have a little look at some grammar. So again, I mean, if you are a brilliant writer, move on, have a nice day. The rest of you stick around, just for, I think, probably 5-10 minutes, if that. First thing to look at is run-ons. This is a common problem in English 100 writing. And it's to do with just understanding what a sentence is. I've done some work on this with you already, but I just want to build on that. And there are different ways of fixing the problem. But let's look at this first example here. Traveling by bus is often unpleasant and the fares are reasonable. Two things here, two problems. Firstly, we've got two sentences, two independent clauses. Subject, verb, complete thought, remember that. And we've actually got something which doesn't really make sense logically. You know, if you say that something is unpleasant and the fares are reasonable, it doesn't run. It's not parallel. It doesn't really make sense. So, you know, we need to do something, right? A is horrible. I mean, we have a coordinating conjunction, the word and, but the comma's in the wrong bloody place, right? And we still have that logic problem. B, we still got the logic problem, and now we've got a comma splice. I hope you can see that. As I said before, a comma's not going to do it. It's not strong enough to separate two sentences. C is wonderful. This is how I want you to write. Okay? There is the semicolon. Could be a period. Then we have the adverbial conjunction, however, comma. The fares are reasonable. And now the logic problem is sorted out too, because the word however is adjusting and now creating a balance. It's unpleasant, but however, you know, the fares are reasonable. So that kind of makes it bearable. Yeah? It all now makes sense. Number two, we've got two sentences again, two independent clauses. Don't talk is a sentence in the imperative. Leave quietly. So if we look at B, B is a good example of why we need to be careful with grammar and punctuation, because B actually means the opposite of what's intended. B means don't talk and leave quietly, make a bloody noise on the way out. So, it's wrong. C is wrong because we've got a comma in the wrong place, and so obviously A is the way to go here. Comma, coordinating conjunction. You could just use a period. Don't talk, period, leave quietly, or don't talk, semicolon, leave quietly. That works too. Number three, the thunderstorm raged and the lightning grew worse. Again, two sentences, subject, verb, complete thought. We've got a coordinating conjunction, but at the moment it's a run-on, okay? A is an attempt to deal with the problem, but it fails because we just now have a comma splice. B looks great to me. C is, well, comma's in the wrong place, right? It needs to come before the coordinating conjunction and not after it. Number four, just a total mess of a run-on sentence here. A, there's an attempt to deal with the problem, but it's a comma splice. B, they've used the coordinating conjunction here. Great whoopee-doo, but there's no comma in front of it, so that fails. C, C is the simple fix, right? When in doubt, stick a period. I actually say this to my second language students in particular. You know, when in doubt, just write short, stubby sentences with periods. Yes, stylistically your essay will be crap, right? But at least it will be grammatically correct. So go simple in terms of syntax and sentence structure, if this is a problem for you. And with C here, of course, you now know that could be a semicolon. 5, comma splice. A, horrible run-on. B, wonderful. C's what a lot of you do, even the good writers. Particularly if you use the word however. You put a comma either side, and usually that's not going to work. And here it's not going to work because you've got two sentences, two independent clauses. You need to separate it properly. It needs to be a period or a semicolon like we have in B. Okay? All right, final one. I know this is boring, but it is important. So here we are. Adverbial conjunctions. Fancy word for these options. A, B, C. Mrs. Smith found an earring in the glove compartment of her husband's car. The next day, Mr. Smith had to have his ear pierced, which says something about their marriage, doesn't it? So what would we do here? You could use a period, and then you could choose one of these options. And obviously, in this case, it would be B, therefore. So it could be period, therefore, with a capital T, comma, the next day. And hopefully you now know if you can use a period, that means you can also use a semicolon. And that's going to work better here because it suggests a slightly closer connection. Number 2, that green cake looks like a swamp creature. This is where writing on the computer you need to be careful with because words can go missing, right? I should have written the indefinite article a. That green cake looks like a swamp creature. Semicolon. Furthermore, comma, it smells like one, period. Could use a period instead of furthermore. Sam spent 6 hours in the sun on the golf course. Semicolon. consequently, comma, he got sunburn. His parents think he wastes time on the internet, semicolon, therefore, comma, they are changing the password. Animals are unable to place bets. I have no idea what they were smoking when they put this together. Animals are unable to place bets, semicolon, thus horses are unable to bet on track meets. Okay, the socks I got for my birthday were too big, two with two O's, too much, too many, too big, semicolon, besides, comma, they weren't the color I need, period. Okay, enough of that bollocks. I'm going to leave you with that today. What I suggest is that you just go over the handouts that I've given you so that you're kind of familiar now with strategies and devices and fallacies. And then when I send you the practice, have a go and see what you do in comparison with the one that I send you, the analysis that I write. And yeah, just relax with this, guys. That's what I'm really trying to get through to you in today's video. Relax. The message is yours. The interpretation is yours. So we'll do the practice and then we'll do the assignment. And then at some point I will see you again like this. Okay, so bye for now.